Welcome to My Business Matters, the Michigan Chamber podcast.
Hello, I'm Jim Holcomb, President and CEO of the Michigan Chamber, and today's podcast host. We're going to take a closer look at Michigan's corporate income tax. Some will shorthand that down to CIT, the current state of Michigan's tax and economic climate, and how it all kind of fits together. Really pleased to welcome two people who are worked deep into all things tax policy with me today, and they're going to help us break all this down. The first is Lynn Gandhi. She's a partner and tax attorney at the law firm of Foley Lardner. They're one of Michigan's most prominent and respected law firms, and she's also the chair of the Michigan Tax Policy Committee. And then Michigan Chamber's very own Randy Gross. He's our Senior Director of Legislative Affairs and the Associate General Counsel. Thanks so much for joining me today, Lynn and Randy.
Hi, Jen. Glad to be here.
Thank you, Jim.
Well, just so our listeners have a little bit of perspective, I'd like to start just kind of with your background, and so they know who they're listening to and what you work on. So, Lynn, if you just tell us, a little bit about yourself and your practice group.
Sure. So, I got an LLM in taxation at NYU and moved back to Michigan in 2000 after working out of state for a number of Fortune 1000 companies. Then, after 14 years in-house, went back to private practice, where I've been since 2008.
And
my everyday practice ranges from specific Michigan tax questions. I do multi-state taxes, so I also get to work and see what happens in other states and their corporate income tax and other regimes. I do a lot of tax litigation, legislative support, and also the area of unclaimed property.
Did you always know you wanted to work in tax, Lynn?
Oh gosh, no. No one ever wants to work in tax. Somehow you fall into it, and it's a good practice area because there's two things certain in life, and that's death and taxes.
Yeah, that's right. And in your case, you just become so good at it. You're a recognized expert. Somebody we at the Michigan Chamber, and I know many Michigan companies rely on your advice. So it's one of those things where you get too good, and that becomes your career path. So. Thanks for what you do. We do appreciate you and your firm, and glad to have you here. And Randy, how about you? What's your background? How did you come to the Michigan Chamber?
Sure. So my background is really in the policy world. I've grown up in the policy world in Michigan, handling a variety of regulatory issues all over the board. Did a stint at Treasury, started working through that. Found that it tied in well to the regulatory environment, really started liking that aspect. Had an opportunity to join the chamber and do something in the advocacy world, which is something I've always really enjoyed, and represent business, which has been an important piece of the positions I've taken in the past in helping that community.
Yeah, one thing I've always thought with tax, and Lynn, you as a lawyer, and Randy's a lawyer, and I'm as well, that I always like the intersection of policy because it's there. Now, there may be different interpretations. That's what we all get to argue about as attorneys. But I like that there are actually words on a paper, and then you kind of have to work from there. But, Lynn, recently the CIT has really taken center stage in policy debates here in Michigan. And before we get to why that is, can you just give our listeners a little bit of primer on what is the CIT and who pays it?
Yeah, so the CIT is our Michigan corporate income tax, which, by the way, came into effect in 2012 when we got rid of two very horrendous and unique Michigan state taxes, the SBT and the MBT. Mm-hmm. When we moved to the CIT, we now have a tax that businesses pay on their net income, so they have to be profitable to pay it, and it's based off of your federal taxable income. So a CIT regime is much more predictable than what we had before. So that was a welcome change that occurred in 2012. To highlight, though, it's not just large businesses that pay the Michigan corporate income tax. It's all businesses, large and small. Mm-hmm. And you only pay the corporate income tax when you have net income. So that is, one thing that we generally like about the CIT, the corporate income tax. And I'll talk about I'm sure you're going to ask me about some of the changes that are proposed. So I would say the change to the corporate income tax put us into a much more stable and predictable tax regime that Michigan had for had not had for years. And that was really critical for businesses and to start to see business recovery in the state.
When we went from the SBT to the MBT, you're talking about stability. Does that also a benefit for government, the stability in the taxes, because they utilize their revenue streams for budgeting purposes and trying to project on out. It's good if it helps the business, but does it help government as well?
It helps government out as well. Now, I will say one thing about a corporate income tax, like any type of income tax, is that it can be cyclical. When times are good and people are paying income taxes, the government benefits with its collections. When we are in bad times where businesses are faced with net operating losses, there's very little net taxable income, then government collects less. And in fact, it was that cyclicality that drove kind of some of the changes that we had seen previously in our prior tax regimes. But generally, a corporate income tax is a very predictable regime, and it's going to be based on all our federal tax forecasts and such. The states that have a corporate income tax just then piggyback, meaning they start with your federal taxable income, and then the state gets to tax their share of what you earned here in Michigan.
And I think that's one of the good things that many people like about it, at least in the business world. It's taxing actual income. It's not taxing activity of possibility of income and trying to calculate that out.
Yeah, something I want to build on what Lynn commented is who pays this. Mm-hmm. I think there's a big misconception on what corporate income tax means and what corporations are. Anybody can be a corporation. Yep. It could be your service station down at the corner. It can be the little boutique store. It could be a salon. This is just a choice of how you've decided to structure your company as an entrepreneur.
So it's a regulatory filing in that sense of what you chose.
And then you file your tax. It could be because I want to make sure I separate my business income from my personal income. I have employees. I want to make sure everything's situated right there. These aren't necessarily, in fact, over 85% of these in Michigan are companies under 100 employees, not people that are out there trading stocks. These are everyday businesses in Michigan.
Yeah, and I think that's a good distinction made because I think a lot of people, you hear the word corporate, and especially in political circles now and just common usage in the public, you think of a corporate world, you think of the big buildings on Wall Street or your biggest companies in every state. But as you're saying, Randy, I think it's like 87% have 100 employees or less.
Right.
They're paying this.
Right. These are Main Street businesses.
Now, Randy, we kind of know what CIT is now, and you and Lynn have done a good job outlining that. How come what's the reason it's such a big popular topic right now?
Well, the topic is because of the roads we're all driving on. The governor has come out with a proposal to increase the corporate income tax by nearly 45% on businesses to fund the roads. There's been legislation introduced to do the same. This is a significant increase, and I would like to say it's a complex bill to look at and read, but it unfortunately or fortunately, it's super simple. They strike one number and add in another, and it's to fund that cost.
What are those numbers? What are we going from and to if this was enacted?
Yeah, so it's striking the current rate of 6% and moving it up to 8.5%.
Lynn, what do your clients think about that? Is there some offset where they would benefit if this goes up, another tax goes down, or would they just be looking at a huge tax increase? And if so, what does that, in your opinion, do to Michigan's competitiveness when we're trying to attract jobs here to Michigan, not push them away?
Well, just like what's happening at the federal level, the proposal out there has really created a lot of uncertainty for businesses in Michigan in terms of this rate increase. A 45% rate increase is a significant increase and really unheard of in the realm of state corporate income taxes. Mm-hmm. There are some states that do have rates at that 8 and above %, but they never jumped from 6% to get there. And also at 6%, we are pretty competitive with our corporate income tax rate, particularly against our other Midwest neighbors. Mm-hmm. And that is what has really fueled a lot of business development in Michigan when Michigan went to a corporate income tax. I will tell you that this rate proposal, along with a few other proposals coming from the administration, has increased the uncertainty because while businesses, like if you pay more state corporate income tax, You do get a deduction at your federal level for your state income taxes paid, but that doesn't offset a 45% rate increase. And if the focus is on, at least this is my policy perspective, making the users of the roads pay for the roads, we all use the roads every day. It's not just corporations. There's a lot of businesses that are not in the form of a corporation. You could be an LLC, as Randy was mentioning, kind of choice of entity. And so that policy perspective has just, whittled down to say we should pay a large amount of this should be borne by corporations with a significant tax increase. And I will tell you, it's not just raising the rate that impacts corporate income taxes. It's also how we, Treasury, through the statute, through the legislation of Michigan, has determined how much of a corporation's income gets subject to the Michigan corporate income tax. So if you're a small Michigan business or any Michigan business that has predominantly most of its sales in the state, you're going to be hit disproportionately by this increase than you would if you were a multi-state business where maybe your sales are spread out over 5 to 10 different states. So we've kind of lost track. I mean, I think maybe the legislators are not aware of how much not only the rate will go up, but who has the majority of the sales in the state. And most of those are going to be Michigan-based businesses who sell their goods or products within, 200 miles or so of their business location.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's something I hadn't even thought of, Lynn. You raised a really interesting point, especially in today's marketplace and so much being done online. What sales are in Michigan and what sales are out. How would that, I'm sure there's probably a test or there's some type of guidance from Treasury of how they calculate this, but if I have a business in Michigan and I'm selling online and somebody in Illinois buys my product, is that taxable in Michigan? Would that factor into my my CIT?
Well, we don't have enough time to go into all the granularity of the rules of how we assign sales, but your example is pretty simple. When you're selling goods, a tangible product, your sale gets assigned to the state of destination. That doesn't mean that state is the only one who gets to tax it. What it means is we take your net income, your federal net income, and at a high level, it gets divided among the states based on where the market for that good or service is, or which for goods would be the destination. That tells you the percentage. So it's not quite to say that's where it gets taxed. It all goes into the same kind of pie. It's just how we're slicing up the pie. So, I always like to point out that in most likelihood, the smaller the Michigan business, the more likely that it is that their sales are immediate to their location, maybe a few hundred miles away. Maybe they have a few sales in Indiana and Ohio. But this rate increase is then going to, be on 95% of their net income. Whereas if you had remote sellers, people selling goods online, and Michigan was just a small market of theirs, they will be hit less hard by a rate increase.
Yeah. Randy, as I listen to all this, I worry a lot about the economic competitiveness of the state. When we look at any policy, whether it's tax policy or labor law or all types of things, human resource policy, you're always looking, we want to make sure we're attracting the best and brightest. We want to make sure Michigan is economically competitive and we have a vibrant economy. What are legislators or people proposing this and supporting this looking at, say, this is a good thing to do? Because I listened to you and Lynn talk, it seems like a negative.
Yeah, Jim, that's a great question. I can't answer how they view this as a good thing to do that's promoting a strong economic environment. I mean, the reality is since 2018, states with corporate income taxes, there's been, I think, 20 times in the last 6 to 7 years where they've been lowered in other states. I mean, most recently you had 4 states as of January 1st lower their corporate income tax because they want to be competitive, the closest being Pennsylvania. So, it's a great question. I can't tell you why they think taxing small business and, your local businesses and putting the weight of all the roads funding on businesses is the way they chose. We don't think that's the right thing. I mean, it clearly would stifle economic growth. They're already dealing with inflation, some uncertainties around tariffs. Like there's a lot of things that businesses are already dealing with. Adding an additional fee and cost to do business in Michigan isn't going to be good.
Yeah, I tell you my opinion, you're much more delicate with it than I am, is they see corporations as deep pockets. I think that today's populist nature of politics, corporations can have a negative stigma attached to them, and they think that they can get away. They don't delve into the details. They don't know that 87% are the CIT is paid by people with 100 employees or less, and they thought it was an easy mark to get a bunch of money to make an easy road deal.
Yeah. It's a fair assessment. Yeah. I mean, I'll let you be more direct than I will be.
Well, I think it's good because I think what we all want is we just want open and honest debate. I think when we get our best work product from government, it's because people bring forth, and there are plenty of times somebody could have a earnest idea, bring it forward, you peel back the layers of the onion, and everybody goes, well, that really wasn't what I thought, and it was more complex than I thought, and okay, I'm going to move on. What I'm hopeful is that legislators and people proposing this and supporting it look at it and say, is there a different way? Is there a better way? Are we really utilizing the resources we have currently in the state budget? One, do we even need a tax increase? And two, if we do, is this the best way?
Right.
Because, I think Lynn referenced this earlier, I think the best taxes, especially for something like roads, user fees. People who use them should pay for them. Now, we all use them. I cannot drive a car, but if I have everything delivered at my house from online shopping, I'm still benefiting from the roads.
Right.
But let's have something that's broad-based.
Broad-based.
Low rate.
Fees, yes.
What's the prognosis, Randy? You're at the Capitol daily. How are people feeling about this, and what do you see happening?
I think there's concern. The road packages, this came about because of funding for roads. The House passed their road package bill, so this is going to be a debate. We know the governor's office wants us to be part of a holistic solution to roads. We'll continue to fight this. I think we have some strong allies who are in opposition of the CIT, but at the end of the day, we got to stay on this because when people start negotiating, compromising, and trading ideas, you don't want to have it be your idea that's traded for the win.
Yeah, and they started looking at carve-outs and just kind of Band-Aid approach.
Yep.
Lynn, now we've talked before, you've easily been to one of the primary go-to legal resources for so many companies in Michigan. Have you seen the ups and downs of our tax climate? What's your current take on where Michigan stacks up, both from a tax structure and also in administration of taxes? Is Michigan competitive?
Well, Jim, this is where we have a little bit of a mixed bag because it all comes down to process. Moving to the CIT really did bring Michigan into the current mainstream with how most states tax corporations. However, we have two disadvantages with how we got to a corporate income tax, and that is we kind of adopted a corporate income tax regime and all the series and administration of corporate income tax in 2012. We did not have this historical knowledge. We don't have institutional knowledge regarding administration of a corporate income tax. And that's where we're a little bit behind the eight ball. Now, our scorecard, the Council of State Taxation puts out a scorecard every year where they kind of grade the states. And Michigan has actually moved up in its ratings, but we are not an A. And for someone who practices every day, we're far from getting close to an A. And that's really due to we lack significant institutional knowledge regarding the issues that are contained in a corporate income tax. And I don't want to bore our listeners with computation of a net operating loss or when a carry forward is applied or what does it mean by direct or indirect? Because we want to make sure our listeners don't fall asleep at the wheel. But we don't have a lot of guidance. We have limited guidance. And more importantly, we have really no case law. So what happens in Michigan now, when you have a corporate income tax issue, which is a clear, not a factual issue, just how do we interpret the statute? What is meant by the words that our legislator use? We have to go to court. And, going to court is a very costly and inefficient way to get clear guidance from a neutral party on how the tax should be administered. And I say a neutral party because our department does have some informal ways of providing guidance, but that's internally generated. And when you have an argument, you really want to have a third party, neutral party, who's well trained in reading statutory law and understanding legislative history. Those are judges.
Yep.
And so if you have a corporate income tax issue in Michigan, you're really forced to litigate. And it can take anywhere from 4 to 12 years to get resolution through the court system with appeals and remands, et cetera. And so because of that, for process purposes, we really are lagging in Michigan. We're far behind, and it's really a challenge. I would say some of the administrative tasks and chores that I confront daily, we're far behind our colleagues in the other states. And a great example I'll give to you is for the department to send you an assessment saying they think they owe you no tax, the department, by our current statute, only permits that assessment to be sent to you either personal service or certified mail. Like, we rely on snail mail to get really critically time-sensitive documents to our constituents here in Michigan, when most people are used to getting things electronically via email. The mail goes away still quite a bit.
Yeah, I mean, we conduct so many of our daily tasks as well as financial tasks now through digital signatures and emails, and you can verify there's timestamp receipts. I think two things I just take away from your comments there, Lynn. One, litigation being inefficient, certainly, and costly is detrimental, but also it's somewhat a luck of a draw, whatever judge you get or where it's filed, because so many judges have different perspectives on their role in the legislative process. Are they there as super judges or super legislature who can reinterpret and give their own views, or are they really there to give the impact to what the legislators put on the piece of paper, or should they try to read into maybe what they meant, even though it's different from what is printed on the bill?
Well, and I will say, though, just to make sure we're doing that, to be clear to our listeners, if you have a tax controversy against the Michigan Department of Treasury, you don't get to really form shop the way you may. You go to the Michigan Court of Claims, and there are 4 judges who sit on the Court of Claims. But you're true. Sometimes, draw of the judge, and then if you on appeal, your appellate panel. I mean, I've had a case that's gone to the Court of Appeals 3 times, up to the Supreme Court, back to the Court of Appeals. And that is just, it's inefficient for the state resources. Frankly, judges don't love tax cases.
Yep.
Most people who went to law school did it because they didn't want to do any math. And they're usually very surprised once they get into the policy reasons. And sometimes it does take a while, and different judges could have different political views regarding the policy decisions that are going to be impacted by their decisions. Yeah,
and it all comes down to, again, the economic climate we have here in Michigan. If, Randy, I think you've probably dealt with some of our members, it's that instability and uncertainty of what the tax climate is going to be. Right,
and maybe what I would build off of some of what Lynn was saying and you were talking about on the economic climate is, to be clear, like, we're talking about a 45% increase in taxes.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like we're at the bottom of the barrel on a corporate income tax. We're number 26 in the country, so we're middle of the road. There are lots of states that are under 5%. I would argue if we're trying to grow the business climate, we would look at lowering this CIT. Yeah. Like, let's be more competitive.
Well,
let's find ways to do that.
If we're currently in the middle, what would that rate take us to?
It would take us towards the top. We'd be like in the top five worst states for CIT.
Well, let's hope for cooler heads to prevail. But once again, the time goes by so fast. I really appreciate you guys talking about a complex topic and breaking it down so our listeners can understand it and really take away some meaningful insights. A very special thanks to Lynn and Randy for all the work you do on these critical tax policy issues. And also a thanks to everybody for listening to us today. Please get involved, make your voices heard. Tune in to our next episode on the podcast and subscribe or like for easy podcast notifications. Until then, to learn more about the CIT or any of the issues facing Michigan, you can find us at michamber.com.